Bienvenue à tous. Welcome to Reporters Plus here on France 24. Malaria is a disease that claims almost 500,000 lives each year. It hits hardest in Africa. The situation's become more and more alarming in recent years as the mosquitoes that spread the disease are becoming more and more resistant to insecticide. And due to the complexity of the virus, no actual vaccine is available. Though it's said a particular plant can effectively treat the illness. It's from China. It's called Artemisia, and it's not approved by the World Health Organization. It's even banned in a number of countries. So we're asking what's behind this ban. Now, some suggest it's all about the financial interests of big pharma that have turned malaria into a business. And the whole issue has provoked a row between those for and against natural medicine. Well, our investigation focuses on Madagascar and our reporter, Bernard Crutzen.
This is a field of Artemisia annua, or sweet wormwood. It's also a battlefield scene of one of the ultimate fights against malaria. This disease claims 500,000 victims every year, the majority of whom are children. We're in Madagascar. These farmers are harvesting Artemisia annua, a wormwood originally from China. Some consider Artemisia a dangerous plant. It's even banned in some countries. However, it's neither poisonous nor a drug. Artemisia is only dangerous for the anti-malaria business.
Très important, c'est urgent parce que les populations, chaque année, nous perdons des millions d'enfants.
We'll have to have drugs and vaccines and other things to do these eradication.
C'est des histoires de pouvoir et d'argent et de territoire, et c'est toujours ça.
Ce qui se passe aujourd'hui est véritablement terrifiant.
La solution est sous nos pieds. Cette plante est interdite en France.
Artemisia! There are so many other anti-malarial compounds in the plant.
Un grand dépôt pharmaceutique m'a dit, mais là, monsieur, vous êtes en train de piétiner sur nos business.
To understand what's at stake here, a painful reminder is necessary. Malaria is spread by Anopheles mosquitoes carrying the parasite. There are several forms of malaria. The one we're interested in is the most severe and is caused by the Plasmodium falciparum parasite. The symptoms of the disease are severe fevers and sweats which can degenerate into a fatal coma. Children are the main victims of malaria. In some heavily affected areas, 1 in 5 children die. For centuries, man has been fighting malaria on 2 fronts: the war against the parasite and the war against the mosquito. Insecticides such as DDT have been used to combat the Anopheles mosquito and have rid industrialized countries of the disease. In 1964, malaria ceased to exist in Europe. To protect themselves from bites, people use mosquito nets. Since the late 1980s, some nets have been sprayed with long-lasting insecticide. Recommended by the World Health Organization, these nets are often distributed free of cost to the most affected populations. At the same time as the battle against mosquitoes started, so did the battle against the parasite. Extracted from tree bark, quinine was the first substance used to treat malaria. Quinine is then isolated, synthesized and sold under the name chloroquine, and so begins the malaria business. The Vietnam War revealed an alternative treatment. American soldiers took chloroquine to avoid catching malaria. On the opposing side, communist troops lacking treatment were wiped out by the disease. Viet Cong veteran later said that mosquitoes were more feared than GIs. The communist leader Ho Chi Minh called for help from China, which offered to send a medicinal plant used there for centuries, Singhor, scientific name Artemisia annua. Tons of Artemisia were dispatched to Vietnam and taken by communist fighters in the form of a herbal tea. It acted as a magic potion and contributed, albeit modestly, to the Viet Cong victory. Some consider this the first success story of natural treatments over conventional medicine. In the 1960s, the Chinese launched Project 523, a huge research project aimed at isolating the active ingredients of medicinal plants, including Artemisia. Strangely, the West took no interest in the plant, which was confined to the shadows. The World Health Organization continues to recommend chloroquine and other derivatives. The WHO believes that chloroquine has pushed back the disease across the globe. However, its massive use has also generated resistance.
In the 70s, resistance to chloroquine was observed in Southeast Asia and shortly after in South America. Resistance spread and reached Africa in the late 70s and early 80s.
German Velasquez, a Colombian expert, was a director at the WHO at this time.
As far as malaria was concerned, the WHO did not act fast enough when we started to see resistance to chloroquine. So replacement products for chloroquine often arrived very late.
In the early 80s, malaria started to kill again on a huge scale. This catastrophic situation accelerated the return to favour of Artemisia annua. The Chinese Project 523 isolated a molecule which was named artemisinin, supposedly the unique active ingredient of Artemisia annua. In the early 2000s, Chinese artemisinin medicines started to appear in Africa. Alexandre Poussin is one of the first Westerners to have tested these medicines. He and his wife were travelling on foot from South Africa right to the north of the continent.
We're walking deep in the Rift Valley between Lake Maniera and Lake Natron in the heart of Maasai country.
The couple was in Kenya when Alexandre first became ill with malaria.
When we suffered our first attack, I wanted to test this Chinese medicine for myself. It was a bit crazy, but I did it. And 24 hours later, I felt better. In 48 hours, I was cured. My symptoms had gone. I found out later that I wasn't fully cured, but it worked.
What Alexandre didn't know at the time was that Chinese artemisinin medicine is very good at killing the majority of malaria parasites within a few hours. But some survive. So, a combination of the medicine and another molecule which would destroy the remaining parasites was urgently required. This was the start of artemisinin-based combination therapies, or ACTs. The WHO imposed ACTs on all malaria-affected countries. The ACT market exploded, leading to a shortage of the raw material, Artemisia annua. The mostly Asian growers couldn't keep up. The sale price of Artemisia peaked in 2005. Business was there to be made. That's when a Franco-Malagasy company decided to move into large-scale Artemisia annua production. The company's business model is simple. It encourages local farmers to grow the plant, promising to buy their harvest at a predetermined price. 10,000 Malagasy farmers were tempted by the prospect of a good yield, higher than for rice. In one season, a grower can earn up to €700. This is a godsend in a country where a majority of farmers live on less than €1 a day. The smell of dried Artemisia annua leaves hangs in the air in several Malagasy villages. But this is a crop for export to manufacture medicines abroad and not for treating the local population. Some farmers have figured out a shortcut.
If you have a fever, add a pinch of Artemisia, drink it, and the fever disappears.
In 2001, Alexandre Poussin was still on his Africa trek. He'd been treated but not cured with a Chinese artemisinin medicine. And in Ethiopia, he suffered a second malaria attack.
I contracted falciparum, cerebral malaria, and we didn't have the Chinese medicine. I had acute symptoms of a type of malaria that could have killed me. After 3 days, we arrived somewhat distressed at a dispensary. I was given Artemisia herbal tea, the same plant, but not a tablet or a capsule made by a laboratory. Just the plant as a herbal tea. I drank 3 liters of this herbal tea over the course of one day. That very evening, I felt better. I could get up. By the following evening, my symptoms had gone. I was no longer ill. And to this day, 15 years on, I've never had a repeat attack. I contracted malaria and it's never come back. And I never used Western medicine.
Recounted in his book, which sold over 400,000 copies, this experience was of interest to doctors, herbalists, and humanitarian associations. But they hit a brick wall.
Artemisia annua is a pretty plant belonging to the daisy family. It's highly effective, but banned in France.
Effective but banned?
Banned by the government, by the Codex Alimentarius, by the WHO, by people who work hand in hand with pharmaceutical laboratories and those who run the world today.
We went to try our luck at a specialised herbal apothecary. On the shelves next to artichoke, no Artemisia.
We often have people ask for this plant if they're planning to travel in Africa or Asia.
And what do you reply?
Well, that unfortunately French legislation does not authorize us to sell this plant.
In Belgium, a royal decree from 1997 lists dangerous plants banned from sale or consumption. On the list, despite being totally harmless, is Artemisia annua. Curiously, though, it is authorised in neighbouring Luxembourg, home of Professor Lutjen. He worked many years for multinationals in the chemical industry. On retirement, he joined an NGO involved in the fight against malaria. This is where he first came into contact with Artemisia and understood its full potential.
We have run planting programs in Peru and Cameroon. We have organized grants in Senegal and Peru, financed by our Ministry for Cooperation and the National Research Fund. All fine until the day we received a nasty shock. Delegates from the WHO, Big Pharma, and the Antwerp Institute of Tropical Medicine visited the Ministry for Cooperation to say that it was financing activities beyond its remit, that diseases are the responsibility of pharmaceutical companies and Big Pharma. The ministry bowed to pressure, and our financing was cut overnight.
Rather naively, Pierre Lutjen thought he could persuade the WHO to change its opinion. In 2012, he arranged a meeting at the headquarters of the organisation in Geneva. He received a courteous welcome, but nothing more. 1 month later, the WHO published a serious warning on its website. For Pierre Lucien, this was a serious snub.
We said no. You cannot ban treating people with herbal medicine. It goes against tradition, it goes against common sense. We successfully renewed planting activities.
Despite WHO's misgivings, hundreds of researchers are currently working on Artemisia across Colombia, Cambodia and Senegal. More and more scientists are getting involved in Artemisia research as they're convinced of the effectiveness of the plant in malaria treatment. All wonder what can possibly justify the distrust of the medical establishment with regards to Artemisia annua. The most common argument is the sacred precautionary principle. Until we understand the full extent of the properties of the plant, we must avoid using it. But is this precautionary principle applied as strictly to pharmaceutical products? Lariam is an anti-malarial drug which continues to be prescribed despite having devastating side effects, especially for sensitive individuals.
Autre question dans l'actu du moment, comment va Stromae? Le chanteur est KO physiquement, il vient d'annuler toute une série de concerts jusqu'au 2 août exactement, un silence assourdissant.
J'ai subi des effets secondaires du Lariam. Ça m'est arrivé.
I suffered a side effect of Lariam in June 2015 during a tour in Africa.
C'était dans le cadre de ma tournée en Afrique. J'étais stressé.
I was stressed, I was exhausted.
Épuisé. Tout prédisposé à
At a breaking point for sure, but the accelerator was Lariam.
L'accélérateur, c'était le Lariam, quoi. Pendant le concert,
I didn't realize what was happening during the concert because I believed the madness was in.
C'est de la paranoïa.
Of course, with the hindsight, it's paranoia, loads of things. My brother figured out something was wrong. If he hadn't been there, I would have committed suicide that night for sure. I choose my words carefully when I say that. If he hadn't been there, I wouldn't be talking to you today.
The Belgian pop star isn't the only one who suffered due to Lariam, whose generic name is mefloquine. Numerous Iraq war veterans who took this treatment experienced serious psychological disorders, some even going as far as committing senseless murders. Several NGOs are seeking to ban the molecule. Despite frightening side effects and lawsuits in several countries, the WHO still recommends mefloquine on its essential medicines list. At the same time, the organisation refuses to recognise the therapeutic benefits of the harmless Artemisia annua plant. Institutional inertia and a lack of interest from the pharmaceutical industry for a disease affecting the poor has led several charitable individuals to take things into hand. In Paris, we met Dr. Lucille Cornet-Vernet, an orthodontist deeply involved in promoting Artemisia and a friend of Alexandre Toussaint.
Alexandre spoke of how he was cured with Artemisia herbal tea in Africa during his trip. I realized this was a true story, that Artemisia annua herbal tea really does treat malaria, and that the main problem today is that no institution in the world is capable of running studies and promoting this plant therapy. That's where it all started. We said, let's do it. We'll set up an association to develop Artemisia growing in Africa.
Associations sprang up all over Europe to promote Artemisia. These initiatives were often targeted with virulent criticism from those in favour of the precautionary principle. In 2012, the well-known Antwerp Institute of Tropical Medicine took a stand against the use of Artemisia annua.
It's not the Middle Ages. In my opinion, using infusions or capsules where the amount of active ingredient is unknown is irresponsible. I would never give this to my own child. I'm not convinced he'd get better and he could die from malaria. So why would I give it to someone else living in Africa?
In Africa, precisely, researchers are carrying out field studies to prove that Artemisia is effective and safe. Kindu, on the River Congo in Maniema province. Dr. Jerome Munyangi, a young Congolese researcher, is used to taking risks. After a 3-hour drive, Dr. Munyangi is welcomed like the prodigal son. School children hail the man who will perhaps rid them of malaria. Dr. Munyangi's career path is emblematic of the difficulties encountered by Africans who defend a type of medicine adapted to the continent.
Artemisia! Mais Mungu anasaidia mbele ya yeye kukuya ile projet inakuwa financer.
I first came into contact with Artemisia following a malaria attack I suffered in Kinshasa. It was a resistant strain, and I had already taken anti-malarial treatment to no effect. A friend who had already used Artemisia offered me the plant. I said I didn't like quacks who used plants. My friend insisted. On the third day, I felt much better. The headaches and fever had gone. At the end of treatment on the 7th day, I went to have some tests done in the laboratory. Everything was great. No more plasmodium. That was my first experience of Artemisia.
Impressed by this result, the doctor decided to devote the rest of his studies to the plant. With his medicinal diploma and a bunch of Artemisia leaves in hand, he began a master's degree in Paris.
After 3 weeks of analyses, we were astounded by the results of our lab tests. The teacher working with me was also surprised and redid the tests herself. I remember one of my teachers saying, "This is a bombshell." And we don't want this bombshell exploding in our lab, because our funding comes from pharmaceutical companies. And the research was halted. My lab notebook detailing the test was even taken away from me. The Artemisia samples I had brought were confiscated and taken to the laboratory director.
Virtually expelled from university with no grant, Dr. Munyangi refused to give up. He contacted Lucille Cornet-Vernet, who helped him continue his research.
We decided to launch a large study on a significant population sample following WHO standards, which are somewhat complicated, randomized, double-blind testing, etc. We studied 1,000 patients. At this point, I started fundraising. These studies were financed by friends, foundations, companies, because they truly believe a plant is the answer to the evil scourge of malaria in Africa.
Once funding had been found, the doctor returned to his native province to launch the study. "1,000 falciparum-infected patients were involved. 500 took Artemisia herbal tea and a placebo medicine. 500 took ACT medicine and a placebo herbal tea. Dr. Michel Edumbo was the main study investigator.
We diagnosed malaria from blood samples taken before treatment and tested in a top laboratory to determine the parasite count. Patients were split randomly into one group taking herbal tea and another taking ACTs. We collected data every day for 4 months. Both groups, ACT and herbal tea, showed good clinical results. However, parasitology showed the parasite count disappeared for patients taking herbal tea, whereas patients on ACT treatment still had parasites in their blood, even though their clinical condition had improved.
Results were indeed spectacular. While ACT medicines are considered 80% effective, the herbal tea scored 97%, with no side effects, contrary to the medicines.
The results were surprising in a positive way, and that's when the trouble started with conventional medicine.
What sort of trouble?
First, we were banned from holding a conference at the end of the study. When we submitted the results to the doctor in charge of the area, he immediately blocked us. He said, "I will not allow this conference. I want Jérôme to keep quiet and not communicate his findings to the public."
They realized the herbal tea had better results than ACTs, and we were given to understand that the pharmaceutical companies could withdraw support. They accused us of arrogance, and I was dismissed.
In your opinion, who was behind this?
In my view, it was pharmaceutical firms.
What makes you say that?
After the results were published, we told patients that the herbal tea was more effective, and they too had observed this. So patients stopped buying ACTs. We were starting to get in the way. I was contacted by a large pharmaceutical depot in Kindu, who said, "We can't sell ACTs anymore because of your study. You, sir, are messing with our business."
When Congolese doctors talk of pharmaceutical firms, they're not referring to multinationals listed on the stock market. Pressure is being exerted at a provincial level. Big Pharma is not behind this manoeuvring, it's the local pharmaceutical depots. At the end of the study, villagers adopted the herbal tea they had trialled.
Before, I was often ill, but since I took part in the study, I haven't had malaria.
I've always suffered from malaria, but with herbal tea, I feel much better.
In 2016, a new experiment was run for 6 months at the village school. Children drank Artemisia twice a week as a preventative treatment. Not one child caught malaria during this period. Research needs to be carried out on thousands of children to validate these findings. In the meantime, the school teacher is more enthusiastic than ever.
Taking Artemisia is very positive and profitable for our life and that of our pupils. We have noted a drop in absenteeism and increased concentration when Artemisia is taken. The days of missing school are gone.
Dr. Miyangi took advantage of the study to lead a second one. The patients who took herbal tea were in fact split into 2 subgroups. 250 took Artemisia annua, and the other 250 took Artemisia afra, the African species. This one does not contain artemisinin, the supposed active ingredient in anti-malarial treatment. The results were perfectly identical in the 2 subgroups, which showed that artemisinin used by labs in their medicines is not the only therapeutic substance. This caused a huge stir. Dr. Muyangin's study was completed in 2015. In order to impact the scientific community, it needs to be published in a recognised medical journal. But editors are wary of plant-based remedies and studies carried out in Africa. Africans are not alone in discovering the virtues of Artemisia. At the Worcester Polyclinic Institute, an hour from Boston, we met Professor Pamela Weathers, who's been interested in Artemisia annua for the last 25 years. Initially, she focused her studies on artemisinin only.
We've always been interested in artemisin. We are still studying its biosynthesis. But now we know that because this whole plant material is so efficacious at getting the drug artemisinin into the body, we've also seen evidence that there are so many other antimalarial compounds in the plant. And so we now have a much more holistic perspective on our research. The plant material is very nice because it has more than one drug. It has more than 2, more than 3. It probably has about 10. We actually were able to show that we could use the plant material to combat rodent malaria that was resistant to artemisinin. And so as a result, one would consider that this has a great potential to be used against malaria-resistant parasites and also in patients to prevent the emergence of resistance.
The question of resistance has split those involved in 2 groups, for or against Artemisia. Skeptics, including WHO experts, believe wide-scale use of the herbal tea could generate resistance and be prejudicial to ACT drugs. For those in favour of Artemisia, this argument is flawed. Herbal tea has been used for over 2,000 years in China without any signs of resistance. History seems to have proved what science can't yet show. Perhaps the answer lies in nature. Artemisia annua and its African cousin are in fact polytherapies. It's the combination of their various components that give the plants their therapeutic power. They should therefore be used in totem, whole, without trying to isolate a particular active ingredient. The WHO is seen today as the main obstacle to the spread of Artemisia annua, officially because of the precautionary principle, but maybe also for political and financial reasons.
Exactly 25 years ago, over 50% of the WHO budget came from compulsory public donations from WHO member states. Today, 20 or so years on, only 18–20% comes from public money. So the private sector, with foundations such as Bill and Melinda Gates, have taken control of the organization. During the first 50 years of the pharmaceutical industry, drugs were developed to cure diseases. Over the last 20 years, the industry has produced drugs to treat, but not cure diseases. Maybe it's more profitable to have a patient as a customer. Profit comes before public health interests.
In June 2016, Bill Gates made a solemn declaration. His foundation committed to eradicating malaria from the face of the earth within a generation.
We'll have to have drugs and vaccines and other things to do these eradications. So we should be able to complete it all by 2040.
This declaration was made in conjunction with the then British Finance Minister. To fight disease, perhaps the Health Department would have been a more obvious choice, but in this case, it was the Finance Ministry, as the Gates Foundation promised to invest €4 billion to eradicate malaria. We invited the International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers to respond. They replied,
"Unfortunately, we are unable to participate in your documentary. We have no experts available to speak on the subject."
We also tried to find out the current position of the WHO with regard to Artemisia annua, which it advised against in 2012. We received this curt reply.
"We will not be able to address your questions on alternative medicine."
The WHO is clearly not ready to embrace Artemisia, but it is spouting up in many other places. More than 40 countries worldwide produce extracts of the plant for therapeutic use. Artemisia is not only beneficial for health, it's also creating jobs. Dozens of men and women have found work in this new sector. One of the reasons for Artemisia's success is its price, 5 times less expensive than recommended medicines. It's already being sold at some markets.
Before, we used to buy medicine at the pharmacy. It was very expensive and didn't really cure the malaria. But the herbal tea is cheaper, and you get better faster.
I will tell you straight away that I have used this plant at home for several years. That's my personal situation, and I recommend it to colleagues and scientists who also use it.
Professor Diallo has studied Artemisia for the last 10 years in his bacteriology laboratory at Dakar University.
We have been looking at Artemisia afra for some time now, and believe that it's a promising route forward.
In fields in Senegal, research is now focusing on Artemisia afra, the African species which does not contain artemisinin and cannot therefore induce resistance to ACT drugs. Afra has been used in Africa for centuries, and as such is naturally recognized as a medicinal plant. It's also easier to grow than annua.
I dream that every African family has an Artemisia afra plant. It's a perennial bush, and they can take Artemisia cuttings every 2 days to make herbal tea. No more malaria, end of story.
Their hope is that Artemisia will finally be recognized, not against the view of conventional medicine professionals, but with their approval. Publication of clinical trials would force the WHO to review its position, and with this, years of silence would come to an end.
Africa needs insurgents, research insurgents. What interests me in all of this is not seeing my African brothers die from a disease that we can treat. We can find local solutions rather than waiting for medicines to be manufactured in Europe or to come from India. We can find solutions here to cure our brothers with plants that we grow locally.
If Artemisia herbal tea turns out to be the ultimate remedy for malaria, the world could be left wondering why so much time has been wasted, why so many victims have suffered, and why such a huge anti-malaria business ever existed.
That report from Bernard Crutzen. And that's Reporters Plus for this edition. But stay with us here on France 24. Much more to come.